All right, welcome everyone. Episode 1042, Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you to everyone out there, as always, for watching the show, for listening, however you consume this. I do appreciate you guys very, very much. Also, a big shout out to our sponsor, Sunny Reds 1841 Aber Road, just down the way from Highmark Stadium. Great food, great drinks, great vibe. If you haven't been there, do yourself a favor and go check out Sunny Reds. I'm joined right now, a lot to talk about, a busy week last week, going into this week, a lot of things going on. My weekly chat, Matt Warren, SB Nation. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Good. We had a really good NFL draft weekend. It was, wall-to-wall coverage, felt like, from Thursday morning until, at least Monday morning. So, we'll recover at some point. But no, Sunday was still a huge day for us, at least, whether it's UDFA trackers or, people just
Sure.
reading up on, trades or scouting reports or whatever it happens to be. So really fun weekend.
Busy weekend, fun weekend. We're starting to come down from it, but it's still lingering fresh. And I want to spend a nice chunk of today. Now that you and I both, we've had some time. There's no more instant reactions, no heat of the moment takes. You've had time to really sit on things, sleep on things, digest everything. We'll have some of our Buffalo Bills and NFL from around the league too. Draft takeaways, couple other things that I want to get into today. Before that, real quick, obviously you watched night one of the draft and you saw the 16-year-old kid from Orchard Park, Tommy Parsamiso, get to go on stage, live out a dream through Make-A-Wish and announce the Bills' first-round pick. Obviously, that was a great thrill for him. I was live at Resurgence Brewing for a draft party with somebody who we're going to talk about here in just a second. The live crowd there gave him a big pop. It was really, really cool. I bring this all up because I'm really excited about this. If you haven't heard, everybody who's watching and listening to this show, tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you're consuming this, I'm going to have Tommy with me live from Imperial Pizza. So he's going to be with me. His family's going to be with me. I'm going to sit down with him. We're going to talk about how this whole thing, played out, how he got the opportunity. He met Brandon Beane and the surprise, because it was a surprise. He did not know he was going to be asked to go to Green Bay and do the draft. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. Tommy's a special young man, really cool kid. So he's going to be with me live, 8 p.m. Wednesday night, Imperial Pizza. If you can stop up there, you want to meet Tommy, stop up. If not, it'll be available live on video on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all that other fun stuff. So really cool, man. I'm excited about doing that show. Well, for most of you guys seeing this later tonight. Let's get, before we get in the draft takeaways, I'd be remiss if I had you on and we didn't talk about this. Your reaction to, because it is the big story all week right now, probably for the rest of this week too, in Buffalo. Brandon Beane went on WGR and basically lambasted anybody who's bitching about the Bills not doing more at wide receiver. More specifically, during that segment, Jeremy White and Joe DiBiase. I want to get your reaction. Everywhere I went, this was getting picked up. Barstool Sports did a story on it. Pro Football Talk, you name it. Rich Eisen talked about it on his show on Monday, all over the news. Let's start by, well, let me get your thoughts before I chime in. What do you think about what he said, how he acted, how the guys at GR reacted, all that stuff? What's your take right now on all this craziness?
Sure. I want to go back even further than that. When Mel Kiper released his grades, I guess it was Saturday or Sunday morning, I wrote a message over on Blue Sky. I'm like, because Mel Kiper dropped the Bills because they didn't select a meaningful wide receiver in the draft. And I said, well, I guess they're going to have to settle for, being second in the league in points and, scoring 27 points in every playoff game. Like, the Bills showed that they could kind of cobble together a wide receiver group last year and still score a heck of a lot of points and be very successful. So that was what I wrote on Sunday. And then Anthony Marino over at Buffalo Rumblings on Sunday also published an article that said the Bills need to add a wide receiver in free agency. Fast forward to Monday morning, and that stuff absolutely blowing up. Like I'm getting messages from people I work with that are Bills fans. I'm getting messages, like text messages from people I used to work with at my old job. Like everybody's talking to me about this Brandon Beane rant, and so I went and wrote it up for Buffalo Rumblings, added a whole bunch of context. Um, I agree with a lot of what Brandon Beane's saying, but it really, I mean, he can respond however he wants to, but it really felt a little bit out of character for him. It felt more thin skinned than I anticipated from Brandon Beane. Because I do think there's a world where the Bills are okay at wide receiver, but I also look at what happened last year when, Keon Coleman got nicked up or Amari Cooper got nicked up. All these guys missed a little bit of time when Khalil Shakir was gone. Their offense was terrible. Like, I mean, I can see a realm where you're okay with where the Bills are at wide receiver now, but also there's a really good argument to be made that the Bills do need another wide receiver. And so for him to like go on such the offensive there, just it felt out of character and thin skin for me. And that's completely regarding the fact that I don't think they talked about wide receiver a ton on WGR that morning. So that's a separate part of the conversation.
Well, I'll tell you this. Jeremy, I think, was catching some strays in part because he's the guy who's known, and I promise you, Brandon B knows this. Jeremy is the conductor of
Mhm.
the wide receiver train, the choo-choo wide receiver train. Okay. Part of it is legit and serious, thinking the Bills need more wide receivers. And I could tell you from knowing him some, not a lot, but knowing him some and having conversations with him, it's also, and you could just tell if you know him at all, it's also some tongue in cheek. You know what I mean? Having fun with it. We went so again, Jeremy and Joe obviously were I don't want to say victims, but they were the people catching the fire from Brandon Beane
Yeah.
directly on this radio segment. I was with both of them Thursday night at the draft. Jeremy and Joe hosted the draft party, round one, I'm talking about at Resurgence. And Jeremy was on the mic a lot and he was going through the scenarios, talking about what he heard, this and that. And he was bringing up receivers, Golden and stuff like that. But it's not like he was sitting there pounding the table for the Bills to take a wide receiver in the first round. Trey Amos was the name that kept coming up over and over uh, and over again. To your point about how quickly this blew up, quick little funny story. I meant to get up at 7:30 or AM on Monday morning. That's usually what time I get up and get my day going between my podcast, my job, all my other stuff. I usually get up by 7:30. I set my alarm for the wrong time, and I went to bed really late Sunday night, and I set my alarm for 7:30 PM. So I slept. I did not get up, and boss is not around, so whatever. I slept in. I didn't get up till like 20 after 9, and I woke up to about 5 or 6 texts from people and a DM from Jeremy himself. himself because Jeremy and I were talking about. We both heard similar things about the Bills in round 3. And I'll tell you, I've said it on the show. I'll say this again. If you want to call it a source, call it a source. I'm just telling you folks right now that I've heard it on good authority that in the third round, the Bills were looking at 2 wide receivers who both went off the board. And if you go through the draft and you look, it's Kyle Williams and it's Isaac Tesla. And I'm not saying they would have taken one of them before Landon Jackson, but I'm telling you that those were 2 guys that were high on their board and they were strongly considering them. But that option was taken away. They weren't going to trade up. They just traded up in the second round and they pivoted to Landon Jackson. The Bills, Brandon Beane talked about taking a wide receiver. They had more wide receivers in for top 30 visits than any other position. Brandon Beane, right after the draft on Saturday, admitted he was kind of surprised that they didn't get a receiver to the 7th round. That's just the way things fell. I'll say this. I think this is probably based on what you and I have been seeing on Twitter over the last 24 hours, Twitter X, Blue Sky maybe as well. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I kind of share what you said, actually. I thought it was pretty thin-skinned and weak
Mhm.
by Brandon Beane to go on and blast like that. He wasn't interested in having a conversation. He was interested in getting after them. And now all of a sudden, Jeremy and Joe are like the villains. And when in reality, they represent probably 80% of the fans who've been clamoring for more help at wide receiver as well. I don't think anybody says the Bills didn't need to add to their defense. I think very few people are mad at the Bills drafted defense with their first and probably their second, even their third pick as well. It's more, where's the wide receiver? You didn't take one until late in the 7th round. You know what I mean? Like literally near the end of the draft. That's it. And I don't think Brandon Beane's above criticism. A lot of people, you don't know shit. Brandon Beane knows more than you. Here we go again with that same shit. You can say that about every GM in the history of football. He ain't above criticism. And his own words show he was intending to do more wide receiver.
Right.
Right? And I mean, he said it.
And then the Elijah Moore news came out like right after that. You're like, are you freaking kidding me? That he knew that this was happening and still went after them for the wide receiver thing? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
No, and look, man, I'm not trying to be no martyr for the fans. I'm not representing the fans. And I like Brandon Beane. And I also, because I also kind of can respect the fact that he's pissed off, he's annoyed with it, and he goes on the air and says what he wants to say. Give me that over somebody who's going to just have coach speak all the time. And by coach speak, I mean somebody who's never going to say anything of interest. He's human. He's probably annoyed. He's sick of hearing it. And he acted like a human being does in that moment. His emotions kind of came out. I don't think he was very accurate in that, at least not in that. It was the wrong time to do it. Now, if Jeremy would have been railing on wide receivers 20 minutes before Brandon Beane came on the air and Brandon Beane heard that and responded, that would have been the case. But that honestly was not the case. And if you go back and you listen to the show, people would know that. And here's the thing, dude. Wide receiver depth, which is what a lot of people are bitching about right now. I don't think anyone's realistically saying go trade for Chris Olave or George Pickens, because that's not going to happen. But like wide receiver depth, dude, has been an issue. It's been an issue for a while. It was an issue in 2022. They had to go get Cole Beasley and John Brown like off the couch and shit to play. In 2023, Gabe Davis got hurt. Who had to step up in the playoffs against the Chiefs in the divisional round? Trent Sherfield. What happened? Trent Sherfield dropped not one, but 2 passes, including a bomb in that game, and they lost by a field goal. All right. Last year, to your point, you brought this up. Keon Coleman gets dinged up. The Bills offense looked like complete dog shit against Baltimore and Houston back-to-back games. What did they do the next week? They traded for a wide receiver. Why? Because the depth sucked and they needed one, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I think the Superman kind of abilities of Josh Allen, to be honest with you at this point, cover up for a lot. Not a lot of quarterbacks around the league would have success throwing the ball in key moments to the likes of Matt Collins or running big, wheel routes in big moments to Ty Johnson, stuff like that. Not taking nothing away from those guys. I'm just saying, I think Brandon Beane was a little bit off base there. And I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that the Bills, at the very least, lack some depth. Maybe they don't have a number one and they don't need a number one. Everybody eats thing. But you know what? You could use some more help at receiver. I think that's what people are getting at.
Agreed with that. And to see the reaction too on social media be like almost universally pro Beane in this instance, I was surprised by that. Like, especially like you talked about Baltimore and Houston last year, like during those games, like social media was on fire with the fact that the Bills wide receivers were not very good or they weren't good enough at that moment in time because Khalil Shakir was out, right? And so having that depth option is like, why can't I remember his name? Who's the guy that they brought in? Marquez Valdez-Scantling, right? Like he's your depth option. Like, can we improve on that? Yes, absolutely. And so seeing them bring in Elijah Moore, or even like some people talking about them resigning Amari Cooper or whatever it happens to be, like having that depth option would be super helpful. And everybody, well, not everybody, but like that large contingent on Twitter backing Beane is a little bit different than like you and I having this nuanced conversation here. And I think at Buffalo Rumblings, it was a little bit that way early. I haven't checked this morning since the overnight. We're recording this on Tuesday morning, but like it was at least a little bit more nuanced. Like, hey, the Bills do need some depth at wide receiver here. I don't know why anyone would argue otherwise. And even Brandon Beane's not arguing otherwise when he's scouting so many wide receivers and bringing in Elijah Moore like 20 seconds after he goes on this little rant with, dropping some expletives on WGR 550.
He said the word bitching 4 times in a minute and 5 clip that, went viral. He said bitching literally 4 times, which again, I could kind of respect that, but I thought it personally, and if I'm being honest, I thought it was at least a little bit out of line because again, the wide receiver room's not been great. And most people know how good the offense was last year. I mean, we're idiots, but we're not that stupid. You know what I mean? You know what this reminds me of too, because you said the fan reaction is it's taking you back a little bit. You're a little bit taken back by how much pro Beane this all was, and now Jeremy and Joe are suddenly the villains. You know what this reminds me of, and hear me out a little bit before I'm going with this. It reminds me of a couple years ago, a lot of people after the 13 seconds, and then the following year, the Bills and the Bills just weren't ready to play football. It was obvious, man. And Tyler Dunn, a lot of people were against Sean McDermott. A lot of people wanted Sean McDermott fired. And if you didn't want him fired, a lot of people were saying, well, he's not going to ever get you over the hump and yada, 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 yada. Tyler Dunn writes what a lot of people were thinking. And I'm not going to get into like all the nuances of the story because there were so many nuances. But you get what I'm saying? Tyler Dunn writes that. Sean McDermott comes out, defends himself. The players step up to defend him. What happens? Sean McDermott goes from the guy that fans were bashing and wanting fired to the sympathetic, almost hero of this story. And Tyler Dunn becomes the complete and utter villain. Now, in this case, where it's different, is you could say, and in all fairness and seeing both sides of the fence, there's a point Tyler was too harsh on Sean. Like the hammer dropped too hard on him. It felt personal to some people. That's a lot of the criticism. There's maybe a little bit of merit in that. But my point is this, is Tyler wrote a piece that fans were feeling at the time, and they ended up turning it on him. I think Jeremy and Joe, especially Jeremy, talking about wide receiver as much as they have, represents what a lot of fans are thinking. But then Brandon Beane comes back and says, man, you're bitching, quit your bitching. And now all the fans are like, yeah, quit your bitching. When fans are the ones who are doing the bitching just as much as anybody else. But now it's like pro Beane. Congratulations, Brandon Beane. That's the kind of vibe that I get right now. It kind of feels like I'm pissing on the fans. I don't think I am. I think I'm just being honest.
Right. And the Ty Dunn thing, like I was very supportive of Ty at the time. I argued with a lot of people on social media about that because I thought it was a well-researched article. Like at least it like was super critical of Sean McDermott and people reacted to that. I don't think that Jeremy White and Joe DiBiase were critical of Brandon Beane. So like at least at least Ty Dunn earned his earned like the blowback where I don't even think Jeremy and Joe did.
Well, I'll tell you this again, spending time with Jeremy at the draft, he was not bashing the Bills, not going to get a wide receiver. I promise you. And I'm not even just talking about run one of the draft. I'm talking about, we talked about the offseason and what they did. Like he was holding court, having conversations with Bills fans all over the place. And like I said, we spent some time together, and every conversation I had with him, he was very complimentary and understanding of what the Bills have done this offseason. He, just like everybody else, thinks the Bills need to add another wide receiver. It's simple as that, man. It really, it truly is. And for it to become so much more is just a snowball effect. Like I said, Brandon Beane talks, and you know how it gets, man. It just becomes a circus. Like we talk about Barstool, everybody picks that shit up, and now it's all everyone talks about. Let me ask you a question here with the wide receivers, because lost in all this is the fact and you and I, I'm sure, agree they still need to get another guy. It would be nice to get another guy. They can use some more depth. But do you think that the Josh Palmer addition, which was not a cheap contract, by the way, and it was a multi-year deal, do you think that the addition of Josh Palmer is being blown off too much? Like people really don't talk about that. It's like, we need more. We need more. Nobody's really stopping to talk about Josh Palmer, which I don't have in front of me, but I know that was not, it wasn't a 1 year, $4 million deal. He got a nice contract for the Bills. It kind of, doesn't it almost feel like that signing in the grand scheme of things almost feels like an afterthought right now?
In the article I wrote up on Monday morning talking about the Brandon Beane kind of rant, I said that I did the math. Like Mac Hollins and Amari Cooper combined for 51 catches, 676 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now that touchdown number, very good. They used the Mac Hollins box out a lot, but Palmer in Los Angeles with limited snaps had 39 catches, 584 yards, and 1 touchdown. So he didn't have the touchdown numbers, but his average numbers and yardage numbers are right there in the mix with Mac Hollins and Amari Cooper combined. And so I do think people are underestimating Josh Palmer and what he can bring. I expect him to be playing a lot of snaps for this Bills offense.
Me too. And I like him. And I want to be clear. I do think his best football is ahead of him. I think the metrics kind of match up for what the Bills are looking for. It wouldn't surprise me at all for him to be a low key guy. You know, every year, you go back 2 years when we were going nuts. Who the hell is going to be the middle linebacker for the Bills? Tyrell Dodson, Terrell Bernard. What are we doing here? You know what I mean? You lose Tremaine Edmonds, you don't do shit. That was how we felt a couple years ago when Terrell Bernard emerged. It wouldn't stun me to see if 12 months from now you and I are having the same. Hopefully, you know, we're both alive, well, and healthy, and doing this podcast. And we might be talking about, oh my God, you remember when we were talking about how shitty the Bills wide receiver room was, and you know, there was no depth. And look at Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer ended up 75 catches this year, yada yada. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I think he has that type of ability. Maybe 75 catches is a lot, but you get what I'm saying. Like he can exceed. I think he's an afterthought right now, and I think 12 months from now, maybe he won't be. That's
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even mentioned the Dalton Kincaid like injury from last year, and the, like some of those other quote unquote pass catching things that Brandon Beane did bring up in that conversation as well. And so, like, you know, if we can get like all of those pieces back, but like the thing about the depth piece is like you that's a position you can't count on to stay healthy. And so I understand. Like, I do like Josh Palmer. I do like, you know, that say the top four guys that they have at that wide receiver position. So like I don't necessarily want Curtis Samuel to be my like wide receiver 5 with how much they're paying him, but knowing that people are going to be in and out of the lineup, and like maybe you give Keon Coleman an extra week to recover from that wrist hand injury that he suffered, like because you don't have to rush him back to the lineup. Maybe that's what's best for this football team, as opposed to going light at the wide receiver position because you want more depth at other positions.
it's a great point. That's a really good point. And again, I'm trying really hard to be objective as possible. I just said I do like Josh Palmer. I do like his upside.
Yeah.
That said, we have not seen Josh Palmer have any kind of breakout, and it's no guarantee that we will. And to be honest, man, the Bills haven't had a great recent history of bringing in wide receivers who it felt like what they needed was opportunity. You know, we saw with their other teams potential, flashes, and it felt like, well, if you come to Buffalo and you're going to get this opportunity, you could be a lot more. I remember being incredibly high on Trent Sherfield when he signed a couple years ago. It was like, you know, kind of again stuck in Miami behind Hill and Waddle, kind of like Palmer's been stuck behind a couple combinations of receivers with the Chargers. And I'm like, well, you get Trent Sherfield in Buffalo. We know he's a great special teams guy, but he can offer so much more at wide receiver. Well, he didn't. Deontay Hardy was the Bills' first free agent signing. You know, a guy who could, you know, we knew he was going to be a good returner. But we're like, he's going to be the field stretcher. He's going to take the top off the defense. This, that didn't happen. Going back to a year ago, you know what? He's on his last chance. Chase Claypool, second round pick. You know, a late signing. What happens with him? He doesn't even get in the training. He gets a week in the training camp. He's done. MVS didn't work out. You know what I'm saying? And it was an opportunity for MVS to be a field stretcher. So I'm just saying that there's no guarantees. Like I believe in Josh Palmer, but I'm not necessarily banking on Josh Palmer. I ain't banking on nobody except Khalil Shakir.
You didn't even mention Amari Cooper in that. Like when they traded for Amari Cooper, hoping that he could do something, and like he just kind of fell flat a little bit. Now I get like he gets the caveat that he joined in the middle of the season, not in the offseason, but like it's just another person on that list of all the people you just named.
100%. I would say Amari Cooper and also Von Miller. We kept saying, when's the
Oh
ramp
yeah.
up coming? When's the ramp up coming? It's the playoffs. It's the big games now. Never came. Never came. You brought this up too, which was just so goddamn ironic. Right after Brandon Beane's rant, literally Elijah Moore comes into town for a visit. Brandon Beane confirmed as much on One Bills Live later in the day, said that it was a good visit. You know, no deal is imminent. Who the hell knows? I don't buy. He could be here tomorrow, or maybe he doesn't sign. But anyway, what are your thoughts on bringing in Elijah Moore for a visit? His fit, somebody that you'd like to see on this team. What are your thoughts with him?
Yeah, he's the kind of guy I want to take a chance on. Like
Yeah.
34th overall pick. Um, he had 4 quarterbacks his rookie season, 4 quarterbacks his second season, 5 quarterbacks his third season, then 4 quarterbacks in his fourth season. Like he's just the guy that, like, if you want to talk about consistency, he's been on 2 teams. I didn't count how many head coaches he's had, but it's been several. And then he's had like what? I think it's something in the neighborhood of what, 15 different or no, 13 different quarterbacks throwing him passes. It's like, come on.
let me run these down for you, Matt, before you continue.
Okay.
Here's a list. Well, here's a list of quarterbacks that have started multiple games with Eli Moore. Okay, ready? Zach Wilson, Mike White, Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, easily the best of the group. That says enough right there. Dorian Thompson Robinson, PJ Walker, Jameis Winston. Those have been the primary throwers of the football to Eli Moore. And that's not to say he's without, it's not all quarterback and none his fault. I'm sure there's factors, that are you could point the finger at Eli as well. But come on, dude, who the hell is going to have success? That would be like Stephon Diggs playing with Nate Peterman and JP Lossman and some of these other bums that the Bills have had at quarterback in the past. It's what's your real expectation for a receiver, right?
I'm right, but even with those guys, he's averaged 56 catches, 600 yards, and 3 touchdowns a season. Like, I mean, he's still putting up good numbers. And so, if he can come here and even do those numbers, like the Bills could use those numbers. That's not even him taking another step.
Yeah, look, you said it, 61 catches last year. What I like about it, he only averaged 8.8 yards per catch. And again, he didn't have quarterbacks that could really throw the ball down the field either. So maybe
Right.
that could be a little bit misleading. So if you want him here thinking again, he's going to be that big time field stretcher that really opens things up underneath. I don't think that's what you're going to get with Eli Moore. What I do think you're going to get if the Bills were to sign him is a solid depth piece and a versatile guy who, I looked at PFF where he was lining up snap alignments, and it was like about 55% in the slot and 40 something percent outside. So he's a guy who could play inside if something happens to Shakir. He could give you outside snaps for Samuel or Palmer. It just feels like a really good fit to me, like somebody who could do a lot. And the expectations are, it's not like if you trade for George Pickens, or somebody like that, or Jamison Williams, which we've heard about, that's kind of
Yeah.
probably died down now that the draft is over. But it just feels like he could be a good piece at I'm sure, a pretty good price. And that's the kind of guy you're looking for, right? That's depth, decent depth, as opposed to you're not going to get that number one guy, but you're also not going to get a guy who is, a half step from being out of the league, like last year with Chase Claypool, who is out of the league.
Yeah. No, I would be totally on board with the signing. The timing of it, it was just like, I mean, just so perfect right after
Mhm.
Beane went through like everyone complaining about not getting a receiver. So that was great.
It's just really wild. All right, let's do this. We're going to take a real quick break, come back on the other side. I want to kind of go through the Bills draft. I got some takeaways. I want to hear your thoughts on it as well. And then we'll kind of shift at the end to some NFL stuff as well. So we'll be right back. All right, back here, Matt Warren, SB Nation. It's kind of fun when you take up a half a show talking about wide receiver days after the draft. And I feel like we could probably talk another half hour if we wanted to, just about wide receivers, talking about this team, the outlook for them, what they're counting on, who they still could use. At the bottom of like if they don't sign Eli Moore, how is the wide receiver 5, maybe wide receiver 6 in-house looking to shape up? Lots of meat on that bone still when it comes to wide receivers. But I do want to switch and kind of shift gears here and go to the draft. My surprise, Brandon Beane clearly tried to balance the future. I'm sorry, the president of this team needs right now, because you're trying to win a Super Bowl right now. But you could tell with some of these picks too that the future was in mind, like with Sanders, Jackson, and Walker, the defensive lineman guys. You got Ed Oliver, Groot, Hoyt. They're all like, going to be here for a while. Maybe Carter, maybe Sullivan. Like it's been so many 1-year deals with guys, Matt, that it feels like by taking 3 defensive linemen with your first 4 picks, like I said, combined with Oliver, Groot, and Hoyt, who are going to be here for a while, and again, maybe Carter and Sullivan, maybe next year at this time, they're not having to go sign 3 or 4 free agents and using 2 defensive lineman picks early in the draft. You kind of get that sense that right now they're trying to build, like I said, not just for this year, but for the foreseeable future at this position as well, D line.
One of the things about the defensive line under Sean McDermott is they rotate so much that you need players like you said that can play now, but also could like balance out financially and investment wise, whether it's draft pick or cash money going forward. And so I think that they did do a nice job of doing that, but also they need guys that they can plug in because Dwayne Carter, when they asked him to do that last year, wasn't able to do that.
Mm.
And so and so when you like look at like maybe they could actually get rid of Daquan, Jones in August if all of these guys play up to the level that their potential is. If they do it, quicker than normal, like maybe we could start having some actual roster conversations other than like, oh, we have to have this guy because he's like the best thing that we can throw at the opposing team. And so it's not just financials. It's not just the expensive players that they have to balance out with cheaper contracts, but like they do need rotational players that can step in and play meaningful snaps this year.
Do you like how Dwayne Carter was the backup one tech for about 12 hours? He was the backup one tech after Friday night that's according to Brandon Beane. At the moment, he's their backup 1T. And then right at the beginning of day 3, they go up and they trade for Deion Walker. I'm like, well, that lasted a long time. But yeah, look, some guys, again, last year their deals or they're out here on 1-year deals. Joey Bosa, AJ Epinesa in the last year of his deal. Daquan Jones, Larry Ogunjobi, who I am not convinced is ever going to play a snap for the Buffalo Bills, by the way. And I'm serious. It would not surprise me. Look, a lot of things would have to happen, but if the Bills stay healthy through the first 6 weeks when those two guys are suspended and Walker's showing you anything, and Sanders is obviously a second-round pick and is going to play some, and Carter's even so-so, I wouldn't be surprised if Larry Ogunjobi gets cut and doesn't even end up playing a game. We'll revisit that, though. What were your thoughts on the first pick? So Maxwell Hairston, I mean, we saw all the mocks. It was Trey Amos. It was a couple other guys. Shavon Ravel was a popular pick. Didn't really see Hairston, but when I went back and looked at mocks, I also noticed, like in a lot of the mock drafts that I did on my show, he was gone at pick 30. So he wasn't really in a discussion when we would be on the clock with my guests because he typically would be gone. Not the prototype, I think, type of corner the Bills would normally take.
Right.
But obviously, his skill set, and everybody probably does at this point. What are your thoughts? What were your thoughts then? And have they changed from the moment that they drafted Max Hairston?
Well, I'd done a lot of little research on a lot of players, right? Like I wasn't diving deep on any particular position. So all I knew about Hairston was that he was a little bit lower ranked in the cornerback rankings that I saw than a lot of other options. To your point, that's why I hadn't seen him ranked or mocked to the Bills very often.
Right.
He was, I think he settled into 5th place in the SB Nation cornerback rankings, but obviously we didn't really know about the Will Johnson injury and how that was going to knock him down. But he got 1 3rd place vote and 1 8th place vote. So like, there's a lot of different opinions on Hairston, and so I was waiting to see what Brandon Beane was going to say that night, and then again on night 2 when folks had a little bit more chance to dive into Hairston and go back to Brandon Beane. I thought it was interesting that Beane talked about so much that he's adding weight and bulking up because that was one of the things against him. He's on the small side and has problems with bigger receivers, and so Beane addressing that right out of the gate on, I think it was Friday night when he talked about that. I thought was a good ad by Brandon Beane during the draft.
Yeah, another reason why I think maybe it caught some people off guard in the moment because again, and look, we've all learned by now you don't take you can only take what a GM says during draft season with a grain of salt. But I do recall at the owner meetings, both him and Sean emphasized greatly the ability to tackle and how important that was. And I remember hearing about that before because I go back to at some point in free agency and Brandon Beane was talking about how important tackling was in Sean. And I'm like, because I remember saying this to myself, I'm like, well, they ain't signing Asante Samuel Jr. because that dude don't tackle for shit.
Right.
I don't feel like maybe that's Maxwell Hairston a little bit, but Max is a more willing tackler than him.
Well, that's the term that Brandon Beane used in the press conference. He called him a willing tackler. I'm like, does that mean he's a good tackler? Like,
yeah, exactly. I'm willing to try and go on a diet. Do I do it successfully? And
right.
not typically. I usually don't. But what I do I like the speed. All right. And he's a playmaker. And I like the pick now. And it definitely has grown on me. I think my mind was trained for a guy like Trey Amos because I kept hearing the Trey White comparisons.
Mm,
So that's kind of where I was at. But as this went on, it makes so much more sense. This is a guy, and if you're going to play more man, he can run. He can
right.
run with those top receivers. He's one of the few guys that they're going to have, maybe the only guy they have right now, that if Xavier Worthy's going on a crossing route across the field, he can run with him. You know what I mean? He ran a 4.28 40. He's going to run with anybody. So he can run with anybody. He's a dangerous guy with the ball in his hands. He had 6 interceptions, and 3 of them were pick sixes. So he's a big play guy. And I'm all about taking chances. There were guys with higher floors, and we talk about that all the time. Higher floor, a little safer pick, but a lower ceiling. I think his floor is lower because he's not a great tackler and stuff. So if he's not, getting beat in coverage and stuff, it's not going to work out. But his upside is through the roof. Like he could be a Jalen Ramsey. I hate Jalen Ramsey. I hate using that term or his name, but he's a guy that's been compared to. And look, Jalen Ramsey was one of the best quarters in the league for a while, just not when he played the Buffalo Bills. But anyway, Hairston is kind of like that guy. So I've really come to like that pick, and especially when Trey Amos didn't go to the end of the second round, when Ravel didn't even get drafted until the third round. That made me like the pick even more. A surprise on Friday, the Bills trade up to go get a defensive tackle. But, and this is the one, so I did a show Friday night after night 2 with Mike Bunt from Trainwreck Sports. He was my guest. Holy shit. Fans, and in the heat of the moment, maybe they've changed their minds over the few days. Holy shit, though, in the heat of the moment, did fans hate night 2 of the draft because they traded up and they got a primary 3-tech defensive tackle. They kept saying, great. We just traded up for effing Ed Oliver's backup. You know what I mean? People were shitting on that pick at the time.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this pick?
Well, I get it. Like that was what I wrote in my first paragraph when I wrote up the pick in the second round. It's like the Bills traded up for a defensive tackle, but it wasn't a 1-tech, so I don't know where he's going to play. And so, I mean, yes, they need a rotational piece of defensive tackle. Is he going to play some 1-tech on passing downs? Yes, I guess. And so that adds to, his versatility adds to his value. And so I get like trading for him, but it felt off to me, but with positional value just because of Ed Oliver already being there.
Yeah, but and you're right. I'll say this though. I didn't realize this until I saw the stat afterwards. Somebody who was defending the pick, and it's a great stat. The Bills only had 8 sacks from the interior of the
Yeah.
defensive line all season long. And clearly, you could tell, and we'll get to some of these later picks. There was a specific player or reason specific, I feel like, in mind for some of these picks. When it comes to TJ Sanders, it's to have more pass rushing juice up the middle. I do think, a lot of times on passing downs over the last couple of years, like last year specifically, Juwan Smoot would be in the middle. You know what I mean? He would go inside. And TJ Sanders is obviously a bigger, stronger guy. I think if he can help get pressure up the middle, even if it's just on passing downs early on, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a useful pick. Landon Jackson in the third. This is a guy that fans aren't excited about much, but seems like a safe guy. And I think a lot of the reason was because by this pick, it was like, give me a goddamn wide receiver, going back to the beginning of the show. And Brandon Beane wanted one, man. They weren't there, though. But anyway, I think he can prove to be useful to this Bills defense. If I were to tell you right now, Matt, because like literally, I think it was Dane Brugler or maybe it was Matt Miller from ESPN. One of them, their player comp was AJ Epinesa.
AJ
And
Epinesa, right?
if I told you right now, and it makes sense, like the sacks, you look at the sacks that they had in college versus AJ. If I were to tell you right now, you get a third round guy and he's going to be AJ Epinesa for the next 4 years. Are you good with that?
Oh yeah, I am good with that. And I was expecting this to be the 1-tech DT pick, so they did it one round later. But yeah, I mean, I wrote down he feels Epinesi to me. When you watch him, his body control is stiff. He doesn't have that bend, just like a little bit of AJ Epinesa. Feels like he runs a little bit high, just like AJ Epinesa. But he does have some potential. Like, if he gets into the Bills scheme and like can work on that stuff like AJ Epinesa did, he can have a very productive career here. And the Bills, all these players that we talked about so far, are a little traitsy, right? Like we're hoping that they can develop into something more than what they are, and it feels a little bit different than what the Bills have done in the past, where they draft high floor guys like an AJ Epinesa in the second round. and it feels more like they're taking like a little bit bigger swings on developmental guys, like even like a Greg Rousseau. Like we saw he was like really young, he had like those long arms, like Landon Jackson has long arms. Like they have traits, and we can like mold them into kind of what we want. They even did that with AJ Epinesa in a lot of ways because he dropped so much weight the first year he came in, if you remember. So like they're banking on that kind of development.
Yeah, look, if he's your third defensive end for the next 3 years, and I think he could be a starter, but even in this defense, it doesn't really matter that much. You play 40 to
Yeah.
55% of the snaps regardless. I think it's good value for that pick. I don't It's not sexy. I don't love it, but it's a sensible and practical pick for me, which brings us to day 3, the beginning. Right off the bat, the Bills weren't effing around. They trade up to back to 109, which they had lost in the TJ Sanders trade. They trade back up and they give up another pick and they go get Dan Walker. So far, I feel like we've been pretty much on the same page with how the Bills drafting the player and all that stuff. Well, this might be the first one where we might differ. I don't know. We'll see. But what's your thought? What's your take on this?
I mean, I'm happy they got a big boy to put in the middle of the line. I think he can develop into a long-term starter for the Bills at this position. It just feels like um, he has those baseline tools to do that. I wasn't following day 3 super closely with the Bills because I was doing other stuff at SB
Sure.
Nation around our 32 NFL team site. So I was playing catch up on these guys over the day Sunday and Monday. And like the more I read about him, like people like have high hopes for him developing into a starter for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah. And I'll say this too. And I think Brandon Beane, maybe he was only off by a little bit, or a little bit off, but he said, because he did have a back injury, and and Walker said, listen, there were some days he was fine. He said there was other days that hurt to get out of bed. And I believe him.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And you look at the not just the film, which I don't. I could say if you watch the film, I ain't watching the film. But what I will tell you is the numbers don't lie. He was a beast in 2023. He had great numbers, and in 2024,
Mm-hmm.
they really fell off. So, how much of that was the injury is the question. Brandon Beane said that had he come out after 2023, he would have been a first round pick. I don't know about all that. He probably doesn't last to pick 109, though, based on what he did in
Right.
2023. So I could see the value there. I could see him being a Daquan Jones replacement, a Daquan Jones type, a younger version that you can have now under contract for 4 years. All that's great. I hated the pick. Hated it. I hated it
Well, because
for one
you saw
reason.
somebody else, right?
For one reason and one reason only. At this point in the draft, after saying, all right, I wanted a wide receiver in night 2, didn't get one. Jalen Royals, who later went to the Kansas City
I knew
Chiefs.
you were going to bring it up.
Of course. Hot God, a field stretcher who can return kicks. I'm telling you, this dude is going to be a good football player. I'm going to clip this and save this for a year and a half. So watch. Walker will be a stud for the Bills and Royal will flame out and do nothing. But I'm telling you, man, that 100% at that point, 4th round, you got that guy. That's got to be your pick. I know they wanted to double dip, and I know they wanted to get that one tech guy. Screw that, though, man. Get the rotational piece, or you could go get a receiver who could change things on offense. I hated the pick for that reason alone. But I'm saying that on the premise that I do think Walker could have a good future with the Bills. But yeah, I hated
I,
that shit.
I will say, like, I do think if you take a wide receiver there, the defensive tackle probably has a path to more snaps in 2025 than a wide receiver might.
Maybe.
Maybe not if you include Royals like special teams ability, but like I think that one defensive tackle, like if if he balls out, I think Walker could play so well that Daquan Jones is traded or released in the end of August. And I know I've said that over and over again. Like he has the potential to do that, especially if they think that one of those other guys that they talked about, whether it's Dwayne Carter or TJ Sanders, can actually play one tech.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if listen, you're not wrong. If Walker is impressive in camp, okay, and he's all the way back from his back injury, and they said they're going to kind of take it slow with him, but if he shows you enough, and if Dwayne Carter does look good at one tech, and Sean and Bobby Babbage have confidence, I could see Daquan Jones getting cut because you could save some bucks by doing it post June 1st as well. I agree with everything you said, but that I'm being honest. There were 2 parts. I said this on the show earlier in the week. There were two moments in the draft that you got an F word from. I'll say an F bomb. I'm in the mood. I'm not in the mood to swear on the show. This is a family friendly episode, at least today, of Talking Buffalo. But there were two F bombs that came from me throughout the draft. The whole thing. Number one, pick 21. The Pittsburgh Steelers took Derek Harmon. I was sure that he was going to get to 23 or 24 and the Bills are going to trade up and go get Derek Harmon. I was positive of that. And I think there's some merit to that because the Bills traded up to get TJ Sanders, who was a 3-tech/1 pass rush juice kind of guy. I truly believe that. So anyway, that drew an F-bomb from me. And not the Bills passing on Jalen Wills. That was but the F-bomb came out when the Chiefs took him. That was the second strong reaction I had of this draft. Jackson Hawes, tight end, definitely has a role on this team, I feel like. I really like this pick. I picked him in my final Bills mock draft, the only one I got right, by the way. But he's just a blocker. He's an old school blocker, not too much to offer in the passing game, although didn't really get a lot of opportunity. Georgia Tech didn't throw the ball much, maybe give you a little bit more, but he's never going to be, a stud superstar pass catching tight end. But this dude, they like to run the ball. Now you could have a guy like him who could block. You don't necessarily have to have that 6 offensive lineman as much because Hawes can catch the ball better than Alec Anderson can. So there's a lot of things. He's going to take over for Quentin Morris. He played 400 some special team snaps at Georgia Tech. You want to talk about a good value pick, a good steal pick, Matt? This feels like one to me.
Yeah, I immediately looked at the special team stuff when I went into his his scouting report, and I was glad to see that. Reminds me a little bit of Lee Smith based on how people talk about him, like, just that kind of mauler guy that, he might catch like 3 passes on the year or something like that. But like, that'll be fine if we do that. And yeah, to your Alec Anderson point, like, do they want to keep shuttling, the 6th offensive lineman on doing like the eligible stuff? And like, they could go a lot of different ways with Jackson Hawes, but like, he has a path to a lot of playing time right away, even as a 5th round pick. And I do think that he could develop into like that Dawson Knox replacement.
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say, give him a year, let him develop. He's TE3 this year, play special teams, block some, be out there when they have 2 tight end packages, things like that. But yeah, he could become that Dawson Knox replacement if the Bills move on from their contract after the season, 100%. I kind of love the next one together. We're kind of going to get through this and get to some NFL stuff to end. Jordan Hancock in the 5th, a versatile guy. He was compared. I instantly thought Cam Lewis. And
yeah,
Brandon Beane kind of confirmed that. Dorian Strong in the 6th round, the first pick of the 6th round. Great chance to make this team. I could see him taking Jamarcus Ingram's spot. I'll say this based on these 2 picks, you're getting guys for 4 years, cost controlled, young guys into your system. I would say guys like Cam Lewis and Jamarcus Ingram, not a great draft for them because they went at the end. Those guys who are good special teams guys, players for the Bills too. I don't think, 2 UB guys too. I'm rooting for them. I like them, but there's going to be some competition this summer for some roster spots where I really don't think that was the case last year. Ain't going to be the case this year. These guys are going to push for spots. And I could even say somebody told me that they could see Hancock unseating DeMar Hamlin. Like he could please primarily going to be a safety. Like that wouldn't surprise him either. And maybe Cam Lewis has more value as a versatile player than DeMar Hamlin if DeMar Hamlin's not a starter. So, how I already feel about that. What do you think?
Right, and they do need special teams contributors, like we keep saying. So, like, they could keep, Jordan Hancock and Cam Lewis too. Dorian Strong was my favorite pick of day 3. I think he has, on the high end, he has starting potential for the Bills. And like, I'm not going to compare him to Christian Benford, but like Christian Benford was the late pick, the handcuff cornerback. Like, he could develop into that, along the way as well. I like his measurables. So Dorian Strong was my favorite pick of day 3.
Last pick of the draft. Look, I'm not going to get too excited about a 7th rounder. I'm just not going to do it. But Caden Prather has, like, from what I'm understanding, some Mac Hollins vibe to him. Like, he's a big dude. He can run for, pretty well for his size. I think he could be he's a hell of a blocker. He loves blocking. Mac Hollins was a very good blocker. His path to making this roster, to having a good chance in making this roster, whether he's wide receiver 5 or if they keep 6, has got to be special teams. It's going to make or break him if he can play special teams. But he gets down the field. He's a big guy who can run down the field. Again, I just can't get too high on a seventh round guy who was picked 240 in the draft, but I would say he's got a path at least, don't know that I'm gonna bet on it, but if he can play special teams, he's got to be able to play special teams too. I guess that's what I'm getting at.
He's one of the guys that they're probably hoping gets like one of those training camp dinged up injuries, and they can put him on IR and redshirt him for a season, like
So
they've done with several wide receivers over the last several
Justin
years.
Shorter. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. It gets dinged up. Hey, it works. Seventh round guy, you could probably get on the practice squad. I look at this team and I'm like, I don't see practice squad guys except the seventh round guy. I think everybody else, they have 9 picks, and I feel like 8 of them have a legitimate true path to this roster. Like Hancock's a fifth rounder. They're going to give him every opportunity to make this team over Jamarcus Ingram and Cam Lewis. It's just what it is. So we'll see how that plays out. Turn our attention before we get out of here to the NFL. Let me start by asking you this. Shedeur Sanders, how shocked were you that he lasted to the 5th round? The Cleveland Browns finally pick him. It sure felt like that was an owner mandated pick. When you looked at that war room, you saw there was not happiness in that room. There was no high fiving. There was no fist pumping. You go like, oh my God, I can't believe we got him in the 5th round. They had like 6 or 7 cracks at him before that and didn't take him. They do in the 5th. How shocked were you that he lasted as long as he did? And how annoying did it get at some point for that to be such a dominating story? Although I do understand why it was.
Yeah, I understand why it was too, but like poor Cam Ward, nobody talked about that guy for days. It felt like he's number one overall pick, and everyone's talking about this
Right.
5th round quarterback. So I did think it like I was not watching ESPN, but I heard Mel Kiper was like losing his ever loving mind over Shedeur Sanders' drop. I was watching NFL Network, and they were talking about him frequently, but it wasn't like quite like Mel. Um, I, I was surprised that he fell that far. I thought he was going to be a day 2 pick. I didn't know where he was going to go, but that was the other thing that kept happening. It's like, you would see a team, coming onto the clock, and you're like, well, they don't need a quarterback. They don't need a quarterback. They don't need a quarterback, especially once the Giants traded up to get Jackson Dart. It felt like he was going to have, that long wait. And then the Saints took a quarterback, and you're like, okay, here we go. And like, then eventually the Browns took a quarterback. And you're like, well, I don't even know where he's going to have a path to actual playing time this year. The Browns are probably the best team for him to land at, like regardless of what round he was drafted in. So probably good for him. I do think he probably should have hired an agent in this process. He thought he was going to be a 1st round pick and wasn't going to need an agent. And I do think that could have played into this a little bit.
Yeah. In terms of him, at the end of the day, to your point, I agree about Cleveland being the right team to ultimately get selected to, because the path for the competition, although it's crazy because they took a quarterback in the 3rd round as well. But still, if he's looking for an opportunity to compete and realistically have a chance to become a starter, Cleveland certainly feels like the best place. And look, we're 50 some minutes into a podcast. I'm not going to start spitting controversial opinions this late in a show. But I will say there's a lot of reaction, strong reaction to that, ranging from, accusations of racism to just,
Yeah.
what a problem he was, all this stuff. What I will say is this. I think he's the kind of player with his father. And I mean, look, it's documented how much shit his father's talked about, where there's certain teams he wouldn't even allow him to go to, this and that. There's video evidence of Sanders kind of being a shithead towards other opponents, towards being a ball boy, just a lot of attitude issues and stuff like that. There's a lot of sense of entitlement. So I can completely understand when you factor all that stuff. And if it's my organization, if this guy's not my starter, why do I want that circus
Yeah.
in my organization? I got killed, and it might end up being the worst tweet of 2025 by the time it's over. I said it's 5th round. If I'm the Bills and it's the 5th round, I think I'm taking Shedeur Sanders. He ended up getting drafted before the Bills. And my explanation was, even his father's got to know you ain't coming to Buffalo and starting over Josh Allen. So know your role and shut your mouth. That was kind of my take. But no, nobody. If he's not a starter, you don't want him. He shouldn't even be on your board. You don't want to. The juice isn't worth the squeeze if he's not even going to come in and compete for a starting spot. So that's why I think ultimately why he fell. If it's just too much bullshit that comes with it between him and especially his dad. And then if you're a
Yeah.
coach, you don't want that because guess what? Your starter's not playing well. Well, Shador's out of there. Now the coach, oh, get rid of this coach. Let his father come in and be the coach and Shador could start. You know what I mean? Things like that.
Mhm.
Just, you don't want to deal with it. So I think it's that. I don't think it's racism or anything else when it
No.
comes to the owners. I mean, just look at recent history and it tells you everything you need to know. It's the player and his attitude. And not to mention, he's a flawed quarterback as well. It's not like he's a perfect physical quarterback. He's got flaws in his game. Combine all that. I didn't expect him to go in the 5th round, but I'm not
Right.
surprised I'm not surprised he didn't go in the 1st round or maybe even the 2nd at the end of the
Well,
day.
and people were, yeah, we've seen the comparisons with the Eli Manning situation and how his dad kind of controlled his narrative. But Eli Manning was a much, much better prospect, I think, than
Oh,
Shador Sanders. And I think that's a big part of it. You and I last week talked about the players we wouldn't want to draft on our team. And I think both of us said Shador Sanders was
oh,
like the #1 player on both of those
100%.
lists.
Yeah,
So,
100%. By the way, Sean Dolak, he did not get drafted. That obviously, in a way, it sucked, but in a way, he got to pick his team, and he had opportunity. He had multiple opportunities. I don't know. I haven't been able to find out if the Bills were one of them. I don't know, but anyway, it doesn't matter. He signs with the Rams. He picked a situation. Best of luck to him. He's been proving people wrong his whole life. So it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever to see him playing football on Sunday. Disappointing for maybe him and his family to not get drafted. But again, I've said this. Once you get to the 7th round, I almost would rather
yeah,
not get drafted because then you
right.
get to pick the situation that's best for you. So Sean Dolak doesn't get drafted. I got to be honest with you, man. I think this was a good draft for the AFC East teams, especially the Patriots. Gotta come clean with you, man. Will Campbell, so you get your left tackle. Travion Henderson. I saw Benjamin Albright mocked him to the Broncos in the 1st round of his mock draft. Speed guy, home run hitter, man. You take a wrong angle, he could take it to the house. So they got that big time speed running back to go with Stevenson. Kyle Williams is the guy I wanted in round 3, the wide receiver, speedster.
Mhm.
Jared Wilson might start quickly at center. Joshua Farmer's a guy a lot of Bills fans liked in round 2. He goes to the Patriots in round 4. Braden Swinson, a good edge rusher. So I like the Patriots draft. The Jets, they got their offensive tackle in round 1. I love Azari Thomas in round 3. Bruce Nolan mocked him to the Bills at pick 35 in our mock draft. And then in the 4th round, again, another speed burner wide receiver in Arian Smith. And then the Dolphins, they got beefy in the middle, man. Kenneth Grant, probably not a
Mhm.
draft prospect. I'll tell you this at the draft watch party. And it was the first time I've ever been to a big draft watch party where there's a couple hundred people. The first, from the crowd, the moan or whatever was when Miami took him at pick 13. So they got Grant and they got Jordan Phillips, another big time, or not big time, but big defensive tackle. They took a guard in round 2. They're serious about being more physical in the middle. You know what I'm saying? I think it was a good
Mhm.
draft for the division. Hats off to them, man.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the Patriots just keep doing everything kind of like a normal good team would do it, and it's really disappointing. Like I liked it better when they were dysfunctional. I liked it better when the Jets were dysfunctional too. And the Dolphins, I mean, yeah, they still have some serious issues in Miami, so I'm not. I still think that they have the potential to be in the basement of the AFC East this
Oh,
year.
100, for sure.
Yeah,
3rd or 4th.
yeah,
I stick by what I've been saying. Now, look, Drake May has to take that next step, but if he does, the Patriots are the 2nd best team in this division now. And I think it's they're kind of separating themselves from 3 and 4 as well. It wouldn't surprise
mhm,
me to see the Patriots in the playoff mix. It would not
no.
surprise me, especially if
Look
Drake
what
May.
Denver. Yeah, look what Denver did last year. Like they turned it around. I know it's like not quite the same situation with rookie quarterback, all that stuff. Like Drake May's going into his 2nd year, but like it's the AFC's got those openings. At those 5, 6, 7 spots.
Look, it happens every year, dude. You just mentioned Denver this year. Washington, look what
Yeah,
they did. Houston 2 years ago, they went from 2-14 to winning their division. I'm just saying, shit happens quickly in the NFL. They got an experienced, proven head coach and a lot of talent on that roster now. Well, a lot maybe is a strong word. An improved roster for sure, though.
there
Um,
you go. Yeah.
you know, who I think had my favorite draft? The Giants. The Giants had my favorite draft of anybody. They get Abdul Carter at pick 3, which I mean, God, I think he's the best player in the draft. He could have been the first pick in the draft,
Mhm.
very easily. Then they trade up, which was not for Shador Sanders, Jackson Dart. So they trade up into the first round, pick 25, and they go get their quarterback. So you got the best, arguably the best player in the draft, depending on how you feel about Hunter. Um, and then you trade up and you get your quarterback. And I love Darius Alexander, the first pick of round 3. If the Bills would have traded up to 41 and took Darius Alexander instead of TJ Sanders, you would not hear a bitch out of me whatsoever. And then Cam Skedaddle, or what the hell his name is.
Scattaboo.
Scatterboo. I always say that name wrong. Glad he's not a Bill. It would take me a while to pronounce it. Anyway, a fun running back. That's a hell of a haul, dude. They got a defensive tackle, a running back, a game-changing edge, and maybe their future for in present quarterback, man. Well, not
Yeah,
present,
and
but
they got guys that can contribute right away. They've got guys like because they need that Joe Shane and Brian Dable to keep their job. I do think starting Jackson Dart right from the beginning is probably the way to go, even though they do have Russell Wilson. Because like if they go through an entire season and they're like just crappy with Russell Wilson, they're going to lose their jobs. But if they go through an entire season with Jackson Dart and their record's crappy, but like he shows promise, I do think that it gives them a little bit more of a leg to stand on. Like, hey, don't be like the Bears with drafting a rookie quarterback and then immediately changing the entire coaching staff around them. Draft the rookie quarterback, let him play, earn it, get his lumps, and then go from there. And so I do think that Jackson Dart's going to be Brian Dable's best friend for about the next 6 months.
I agree with that sentiment 100%. If you're going to win 7 or 8 games with Russ Wilson, you're going to get fired. If you win
Yeah.
6, 7 games with your rookie quarterback, Dable's telling you that, hey, man, we might have the next Josh Allen. I can make this kid into the next Josh Allen. Maybe that buys you more time. I thought the biggest reach, and it brings a lot of joy for me to say this, the Bengals. Shamar Stewart at pick 17, I hated that. I know it's traitsy, he's big, he's got the speed, all this and that. We talked about this. I know we did during our preview. 1.5 sacks, 3 straight years. How do you take an edge rusher in the top 17 of a draft who's never had 2 sacks in his career in college? What's your expectation for him? Is he going to go from 1.5 sacks in college to 13 in the NFL? That's wild to me, man. That's mid day 2, day 3 pick for me. And
Yeah,
it's
I did the
team.
I did the little fist bump when the Bengals took that guy. I'm like, yes, like the Bill. First of all, it took him off the board for the Bills, which was like the number 1 priority for me. But the second one was like, oh, good, he went to the Bengals.
Yeah. Couple more I got here. I love to say that about the Bengals. I hate to say this about the Ravens. Holy shit, they got 2 potential studs, man. Malachi Starks, who I wanted him to be there at 30 just because I wanted to know if the hype was real. I wanted to know if the Bills were going to take a safety at 30. Going by how they did the rest of the draft, I would say I don't think so because they really were bent on a corner and a defensive tackle, I think, with the first 2. So I don't think they would have taken him, but we'll never know. He goes to the Ravens. He is a really, really good safety. And then they go get Mike Green in round 2, who has top 12 ability, but tons of character concerns. Again, great teams take chances on flawed players or flawed human beings, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm at the point with Brandon Beane. I've said this. I would not have I would not have criticized Brandon Beane for taking Mike Green in the first round just because of the upside. You got to take some chances. The Ravens do. If Starks and Green hit, and then like that defense just never stops getting great players, man. Pisses me off.
Yeah, my ears definitely perked up when I heard that they got Starks. I'm like, ooh, that's a tasty little pairing right there. Like having him on the Ravens. Yeah, the Mike Green stuff obviously scares me with the sexual assault allegations. If I was the Bills, I would not be in love with that pick either. But I mean, once you get into like round 2 and round 3, like it makes more sense. And so it was good value for the Ravens if he can stay, out of trouble. And like you said before, like you saw the Eagles do it with Jalen Carter. They got, a generational defensive tackle who had a lot of off the field concerns coming into the NFL.
Yeah. My last takeaway from the draft is one of my favorite players in the draft, the guy that I talked about a lot, a guy that was getting mocked to the Bills in round 2 a lot. I loved the idea. I just never thought they were going to take a safety in round 2. That's Xavier Watts. And as it turns out, he went late in round 3 to the Atlanta Falcons and 6 safety. He was the 6th safety off the board. There was a safety who I'd never heard of. I don't know his name right now because I don't have it in front of me and I don't give a shit enough to look it up. Just take my word for it. There was some safety that I barely even heard of that got drafted in round 3 shortly before Xavier Watts, and I couldn't believe it. And man, that's a great fit for him, and he's going to play alongside Jesse Bates, who's one of the best safeties in the NFL. Atlanta went balls to the wall, man. They traded out. It was Javon Walker or Jalen Walker, and then they took another end, James Pierce Jr. They traded up for James Pierce Jr. My bad. So I got 2 defensive edge guys and Xavier Watts all in on defense. Little side note too, a little bit disappointing. My guy Damone Harris, Buffalo guy, UB guy. He's been with Atlanta for the last 2 years. He was on their active roster for the last 9 games. He was one of the, and he's a free agent. He's one of those free agents, kind of like Russell Douglas, Amari Cooper, in terms of when it got to a point, teams didn't want to sign him. They were like, well, we're going to wait for the draft. We're going to see how things go, and then we'll circle back to you. Well, he was kind of waiting on what Atlanta did, and they took a defensive end in their first round, and then they traded up for another defensive end in the second round. So needless to say, I do not anticipate Damone's going to end up backsiding with Atlanta. Hopefully he gets another opportunity. But anyway, going back, blah, 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 blah. Xavier Watts, great pick, late round 3. God, I wish he was a Buffalo Bill.
When I saw his name dropping, I was like, Pat Moran is going to will the Bills to trade up and get this guy.
Could have had him. They took one.
It would have been a good pick, like we were saying. The Bills could have used a starter at safety, and we kept talking all offseason about them raising the floor at certain positions. And so when they signed Damar Hamlin, they don't have like this huge gaping need at the position. When they signed Forrest, like they don't have these huge gaping needs, and sometimes that leads to them not addressing it at all in the draft. Sometimes they still do. So obviously they did with cornerback because they drafted 2 of them. So I mean, Dane Jackson should not feel safe today. So we talked about that when he was signed. Like it should not change how they approach the NFL draft, and obviously it didn't.
I said that, right? I said, I hope. I like Dane Jackson. I got none against him, but I'm like, I hope your boy is renting like a month-to-month complex right now, or one of those apartments in an apartment complex, and I hope he didn't house hunting right now. Did I cover everything? Did I forget anything?
No, I mean, I just like overall, I was surprised that they didn't take a linebacker because I just think they have such a hole at linebacker with Bailey Spector, and like Matt Milano being in the last year of his contract. I don't think it was a necessity, just like we talked about at safety, right? Like they have a suitable linebacker core there. I just thought that they were going to add another one, especially because of the special team stuff we've been talking about for so long, that they lost all these, core special teamers. That's a place where they could add one. So that was the one thing we haven't talked about today that like really stuck out to me about the Bills draft.
100%. Yeah, that's God, man. Sean, I feel like he would have been a good fit with the Bills. I don't know why they didn't take him. Who knows? I hope that he makes them pay. But yeah, look, any linebacker right now, the Baylon Spector, Joe Andreessen, Olafocio's probably safe, but the other 2, I don't think they're safe. And last point, I don't even know who they are. But I look at this roster and we're shaping up to have a lot of battles this summer. Maybe there's an undrafted free agent who gets into the linebacker mix at some point. I could see that happening. I know they signed one. I don't remember who it was, but
yeah, they signed 2, but only I think one has a path. Hold on, I wrote it down, but I can't remember where it was. Oh, here it was. Leonta Jenkins. I think he went to Virginia or Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
He definitely has a chance to make the team and make an impact. They have another one, a Stanford linebacker, Noah Martin, but probably not. He's just an invite at this point.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. I'll tell you what, man. Even though the draft's over and it's like the downtime for football, obviously, there's enough things going on. There's enough exciting things about this roster to be able to carry on some good conversations here in the coming weeks, combined with stuff like we'll hear a little bit here and there about mini camp and schedule release, and then bam, you close your eyes, you take a sleep, and it's training camp before you know it. But we'll find some interesting angles, some interesting things to talk about. And even if we don't, other people will do it for us. Brandon Beane's going to go on the air again, or somebody's going to do something. So Matt and I will have plenty to talk about. Make sure you follow Matt on social, Blue Sky or Twitter. It's at
Mhm.
Matt Rich Warren, SB Nation, your one stop for anything NFL, not just the
Sure.
Buffalo Bills. But if you're a Bills fan, of course, check out Buffalo Rumblies. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thanks.
All right, guys, I'll be back again one more time live tomorrow night or tonight, depending on when you're listening. Tommy Parsmizio from Orchard Park will be my guest. Talk to you then.